Right, so here we are. The third in conversation with, and today we have the wonderful Stuart MacLennan from Circular One, recently of Cows & Co. As I normally do, I won't introduce Stuart. Stuart will introduce himself, and then he'll give you an idea of what he does and what he's up to. And what I'll do, I'll just jump in every now and again with some questions. Is that okay, Stuart?
Perfect. Yeah.
Perfect. Right. Over to you, Stuart. You introduce yourself, Matt.
Hey, good morning, and thanks, Keith. Thanks for the opportunity. I think, at this rather strange old time, this ability to connect and reach out and listen and learn is massively important. So Circular One is basically been born out of a bit of a journey that I've been on. And that journey, which started maybe just over 5 years ago when I left the corporate world to set up my own business in Cumbria, which was very much driven by a number of key things: spending too many years commuting and traveling, and being away from home from a young family, wanting to sort of manage my own destiny. And also in my corporate time, I learned a lot about business from really good people in business. I was part of a very fast-growing business called Genus, but also in the last 2 or 3 years, learned a lot about the global challenge that population growth is bringing, and the consequences of that on sustainable economy, sustainable society. And that really resonated with me. So that sort of began my path into my own business, which was where Cows & Co came from. And Cows & Co was born with two principal drivers: sustainable food, sustainable energy. Sustainable food being short, transparent supply chain, high quality business that delivers a great story, great product, and good margins. Sustainable energy follows a very similar path. It is about low carbon energy production that's then used to build business. So it should be a stimulant. We built that business with my fellow directors that we started from and built it. And in March this year, we separated the businesses, which was sort of worked through last year, very much with the idea that we got to a stage where the food business and the ambitions of that were going one way. And my focus was very much on the energy business, because I could see the importance of really how, as part of a clean growth society, meeting the global challenge of net zero, and how we do that, and that I felt that I had more to offer there, and wanted to kick that on. So that began the journey. Circular One was born out of that. Circular One's extremely simple. It's based on the whole premise of a circular economy. So everything we do is about not trying to reinvent the wheel. You look to try and take this basic premise of whatever you start with should be sustainable. So be it clean energy production or whatever, but in our case, predominantly as the core of the business, producing low carbon, clean energy, and then using that to stimulate growth. And from that, we've got business involved in drying forages, which then goes into the equine market, and then ultimately it's going to go into the agricultural market, taking waste paper crumb that was otherwise going to be spread on land and such like, and turning that into premium bedding for pet and equine and poultry markets. We produce heat and power for processing. So there's a business up in Edinburgh that we supply some steam for. We're currently in the process of putting our first sort of net zero ecosystem village or business community together, which is going to start. We'll be going public about that new company or that new joint venture hopefully next week. We're just finalizing the articles and the heads and such like at the moment. And that'll be a massive step up for us. But it's all triggered by this basic point of whatever you start with must be about sustainability, and that should be then go on and create stages of opportunity right through the economy. That's the baseline. And then from that, we again, we're not about reinventing the wheel. We're not a big team. There's two of us that are driving the business in terms of shareholding. And then we've got a chap called Colin Gilchrist come in, who's driving this marketing strategy. So there's basically a team of 3 there. We've got people involved in all the different aspects. There's about 10 people involved in different parts of it. There's a team of 3 at the core, and our accountants, of course, and lawyers. But there's a small team very much focused on this of building this what I might call foundations or architecture that then goes on and creates all these opportunities. So that's something that go back to it, and it's about business for me. You're doing something you believe in, you're doing something you're passionate about, and you're doing something that's got resilience. And I find that, you know, COVID has come along and actually ultimately for me, has been an intriguing barometer of that, because, you know, COVID's, of course, it's caused us pain, it's caused us hassle like everybody else, but it hasn't stopped us. Quite the contrary, it's actually spurred us on, because it's absolutely vindicated everything we stand for, which is global supply chain, too much reliance on cheap and cheerful and just in time. That's not good for the planet. It's not good for society. It's not good for business. So actually, going back to that premise about, if we, you know, in simple things, if we use our waste streams, if we use our land better, if we use our skills better in this country, we can transform our supply chain as a result of COVID. And we will transform our supply chain. You know, this lovely term of onshoring around, which means that, you know, if we talk about the simple space of COVID, we can deal with the PPE challenge today. You know, we come on to our testing business in a minute. We use these swab sticks in our testing business. They come from China, right? You know, they have, like, I don't know, quadrupled or maybe even more, massively increased in price over COVID. You know, this is a really simple thing to make. And, you know, I actually want us to make them here. I want us to make them in the northwest of England and Scotland, but I wanted to make them locally because it's a part of the story. You know, it is about that. And others are doing the same. So we're not trying to be clever. We're not trying to say we're leaders. We're part of a group of people that have got the same mindset. So that's a kind of very simple background. It's all about sustainability. It's about clean growth. It's about resilient business. It's about doing something you believe in. It's about doing something you enjoy. And if you get that, I believe if you get that recipe right, then actually business isn't just business. Business is about how you play your part in society and how you play your part in the economy. And this socioeconomic balance, for me, COVID's taught us we've got to get that right. You know, working like a dog 18 hours a day is not sustainable. Lagging around at home waiting to be handouts from the government is not sustainable. There's got to be a balance. And we've now had, you know, probably decades of one extreme, and now we've had weeks of another extreme, and we've got to take that shock that we're in and create a balance. So that's the background. Then just a sort of final piece of context to all of that. I'm very lucky in the sense that because I'm not the shyest soul in the world, I've been involved with our local LEP, and I sit on the Cumbria LEP Clean Growth and Innovation Board. And I focus on and put some effort into helping, you know, make things happen there. So part of that journey is also involved me working with Cheshire, Warrington, Lancashire, and Cumbria as a cohort of looking at, again, clean growth. And I was very lucky. I got a chance to go to London beginning of March with this group, which was led by MIT. And MIT have got this REAP program, which it's about basically transformation of ecosystems all over the world. And our focus was around, you know, with that kind of mandate about a clean growth economy in the Northwest. And I learned something really simple. There's, you know, they talk about in our economy, we've got the SME, and they use this lovely term ID, and I've now forgotten the acronym, but it's something a disruptive entrepreneur, innovative disruptor, something like that. But basically what it talked about is, for business to thrive and grow, you need the big corporates for sure, but you need a really, really vibrant SME economy as well. Because that's the bit that can move fast. That's the bit that can pivot. That's the bit that can react. That's the bit that can duck and dive. That's the bit that can grow. That's the bit that can change. And that's the bit that has to respond today. But for that to happen and for that to work, you've got to put a bit of disruptive mindset into business. And that, again, that's something I find really fascinating. So you take that chemistry of a really great local business, a lifestyle business, a big ambitious business, doesn't matter. Put a bit of a disruptive mindset into that, and you can have a lot of fun. So that taught me, in over 2 days, I thought, wow, you know, this chemistry creation that I've always believed in anyway, I saw it being laid out in a much more professional style than I could ever articulate. So that was beginning March. And then obviously a week later, we're sitting with lockdown, or 10 days later, we're in lockdown. And what came out of that for me was, okay, we've got to respond. And from previous relationships and connections I've had, I work with a chap called Chris Stanley, and, you know, he's a biomedical scientist. He has a development lab in London. and he's sitting there with a potential solution for testing for COVID. And I meet a guy called Dave Nuttall. He's got an investment group called FNS with his business partner Mark Frost. They've got some really smart stuff on biosecurity. So again, with the disruptive mindset, you bring these characters together. I bring Colin together and say, right, we need to tell a story and create a business. And yeah, what did we do? Over certainly 2 weeks, over lots of Zoom calls, we set up a business basically, which is based around 3 very simple premises. We've got a really innovative testing platform that Chris is leading, which uses technology that's coming from the human TB field called LAMP technology, which then you overlay that with the existing PCR technology, which is the government go-to technology. And you put that together, you can have with the LAMP solution a really quick test. So we can, you know, if you've got this, this, bit more chemistry in a little machine beside you, in theory, it's a bit simplistic, you can have a test result within an hour. And I get that. That's really, really important, because as a society, we need to manage the risk that COVID presents. Just like everything else within a smart socioeconomic ecosystem, you need to be able to mitigate risk. So we've got rapid check, high integrity testing, backed up by the gold standard PCR. So this is super sensitive, that you cross match it, you can do that. So we can have a test back really quickly. We can then cross match it as a positive, because its LAMP is hypersensitive. So it will potentially present false positives. So you cross reference, and then you've got that. You then link that alongside our Sterilock system, which is a door entry system. It's incredibly simple. You put your hands into a machine, they sanitize the top and bottom both sides. And from that, you then put your hands in, and then you either with a fob system or whatever else, it lets you in the building or in the premises. So test and control, 2 very basic components. Then the smart bit comes about. And test, control, and learn data. So this is about the business model. We're going to test, control data, because we see that what COVID's doing is it's presenting a challenge to society. How do we function with a different level of risk than we've ever known? The only way we can function is by taking the risk out. The ability to temperature check, swab check, control, and learn will allow us to do that. It allows us to get some normality back. It allows business to get back. It allows schools to open. It allows universities to open. It gets business up and running. It also starts to create resilience. And again, it's based on, for me, the fundamental principles we built the business on, about logical approach, test, control, learn, test, control, learn, repeat. And in the process of doing the learn, we'll refine and make smarter and also bring it in. Don't reinvent the wheel. Bring people's clever processes together. Don't try and be a smart ass and say you can do it. Bring it together. I was talking to a security firm yesterday who were inquiring about the biosecurity system. So we can work with you. They've got some smart camera work. All right, okay. I said, you could be doing the heat detection stuff that we can't do, that allows you to actually transport and see if you can get, if we've got hotspots in buildings where there's build-up. Oh, yeah. So there's test control there. So for somebody who knows nothing in reality, maybe I've learned a bit over the last 4 or 5 weeks, but in reality, I'm not medically trained at all. I'm a business guy. I feel very proud of the fact we put something together. I think it's really quite a fun proposition, and we're working with business. I'm sitting here in Warwick Mill, which is a shared office facility. We've got a Sterilock unit on the door, so I sanitize as I come in. There's not many people in here at the moment, but I've built this business from here, which is 15 minutes from home, which has probably saved my wife's sanity by not having to distress her with me trying to do all this from the kitchen table. With the idea that we build it, as I say, we've got a lab in London running. We've got a lab in Manchester running. We're putting a lab in Dumfries, and from discussions yesterday, there'll be a lab in Glasgow / Edinburgh. Now, all of that's based around light touch. We're not trying to say it's big or clever. It's light touch. It's collaboration. We're working with a really, really smart lady who's a biomedical scientist in Scotland, who's going to support us with a network of lab technicians under her little business called LabLast. So again, not reinventing the wheel. But she's got a group of women who've had years of experience, loads of talent, but they've all got other things going on in their lives as well. So they've gone off to families or do different things, but they want to get back and get some involvement. Well, with this, it's perfect. You can parachute in some capacity to work quickly in a problem and then downscale it. So you're not putting massive fixed cost in, you're not overlaying something and putting a load of risk in. You're working with smart technology, smart people, smart process, and learn and refine. And that's pretty much what we do as a business with everything. And as they were built that with the existing energy platform, which is leading us into net zero ecosystem. We're starting a project on in Southwest Scotland. That'll be as they become public next week, hopefully. And then as a result of that, the health platform. And for me, I come back to this point of, you know, it's about something you believe in, something you get passion about, something that is resilient. So as I say, we've taken a knot like everybody, but we're trading and we're doing different things. You know, even our bedding business that we, you know, process, we're helping the poultry sector. So the poultry sector, you know, what does that mean to most people? Well, we're not importing chicken from Europe. We're having to grow it from home. So actually, we need the forestry industry to produce the shavings. So the forestry industry is not going at the moment. So we're diverting product that was otherwise going into the pet market and other sectors into the poultry sector, so we can fill these sheds with chickens so they can keep going. I'm really proud of that. You know, that's a micro pivot, but it's about doing something to try and make a difference. So that's us in a nutshell. I don't know whether that's sufficient as an introduction, Keith, but it's
I think that's more than sufficient, mate. Just give everybody a broad sort of aspect on what you do. Well, one question that struck me as you were talking: how has the government received your testing? Have you had any contact with them? Have they been supportive? Have they been involved?
Yeah, that's a laugh, isn't it? So we have been engaged with the government all the way through, to the extent that I can obviously try to not name names. There's some very significant employers in the Northwest, one of the biggest, who wants to use the test, but obviously it needs to have gone through the Public Health England process. So we are quietly going through that process, and we've been in discussion. But it's taught me a valid lesson as well about, you know, the NHS is an amazing machine at care. It's a bureaucratic monster. Mm-hmm. So we've been contacted by the Department of Health and Social Care. We've been contacted by Crown Commercial. We've been contacted by Cabinet Commercial. So three different organisations contacted us to fill the same form in 3 times. Fine, don't mind doing it, but it's telling me, you know, and there's loads in the same position who are wanting to help, who are being held on the outside. And why I find it galling is that bureaucracy is slowing down the ability to deal with this virus. I'm not suggesting that we're the holy grail, but the technology we're using was validated in Guy's and Thomas's in London. It was taken, developed refined and protocol ready for COVID in a care home environment in London in February, March. And, you know, it works. And it's now being used by Public Health England, the technology. So the partner we work with in the test technology, Public Health England are now using that in Southampton General. Right. Because what's pretty smart about what we're using is it's the way that the test is then taken and the RNA is extracted is the bit that makes it very sensitive and very effective. The hardware is fine, but it's the way it does that's the smart stuff. So yeah, we're slowly getting there. We didn't expect it to be a quick journey. I just find it very sad that organizations like the World Health Organization are saying, you know, you get 80% right, you go. Well, we're way over 80% right already. And we would love to help the care sector. You know, we could go in and just do a huge amount of work with the care sector. I'm not criticizing the government, but the care sector's really been the victim, unfortunately, of the bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. And that's a reality of an unprepared government for an outbreak like this. And I go back to it. I think what this has taught me is we cannot rely on the government to solve problems when something happens. Business has got to be able to step up and step in. And the path that I'm going to follow as we go through this is trying to engage with government to say, you've got to let business help. Do not try and centrally control this. Do not think that the NHS is capable of control. It isn't. It's too bureaucratic. Far too bureaucratic to do all of this. And that's not because I'm saying I want an NHS contract. It's got nothing to do with that. You know, it's having sat on the outside as a business person, I've just watched so inefficient a process. And it's not a criticism, it's a reality. And it's a reality born by the fact that we were not ready, we were not prepared. You know, there was a protocol run 3 years ago. It was on Newsnight last night of all places. There was a protocol run 3 years ago to run, and it proved we weren't ready 3 years ago. We failed it, and we've not responded since then. And I don't think, with all due respect to government, when the media's gone away, I don't think they'll go back and say we must be ready. I think it'll end up being, there'll be an inquiry in 3, 4, 5 years' time when they eventually get around to it. But between now and then, we're going to have more of this. And I think the only way that we can manage this is businesses need to be resilient. So as I say, I just think, well, we're business. We're going to work with businesses to make sure businesses can protect themselves, because, you know, Greg's and others are opening on Monday. Why? Because they can't afford to stay closed.
Yeah.
You know, and they're almost they are going against government guidelines by opening. And I actually agree with them. I think, you know, complete control is one thing, but if we're not careful, the economic calamity we've caused, well, it will dwarf, you know, it will dwarf this. And, you know, the stat that I got taught the other day, as I learned many things, is, you know, there's 300,000 people get cancer every year in this country, and the death rate from that's pretty horrific, and it dwarfs this. Now, I'm not saying it's not focused on this; it is, but the point is, you know, we need to learn. That's it. We need to learn.
Yeah. No, that's great. What I'm going to do is, because I can see the guys at the top, I'm going to open it up and let the guys ask questions rather than it just be me continually. So I'll unmute everybody.
The man that's in the driving seat.
Right, so what, as I say, guys, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open it up, and if you guys have got a question for Stuart, or as Sarah and I said last week, a question for each other, fire away. It's up to you.
Stuart's probably answered some of the questions that I was going to raise, actually. I think there's a lot of smaller organisations that are trying desperately hard to engage with the government to fill some of the gaps, and failing miserably because of the bureaucracy. You know, they're just not turning, or not able to turn around, you know, their contracts, or however that works, and it must be incredibly frustrating for the businesses, and you know, as a population, it's devastating for us as well. So, you know, you've answered that one, that at some point the government needs to take some of this learning on board. How that will happen, who knows? And I don't know what the mechanism is for that. If there's a way to feed in centrally, or I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But from your perspective, Stuart, once you've gone through your you know, your quality, I'll call it quality control, and you know that your testing is absolutely robust, and it sounds as though you're pretty much there already. You know, what's your strategy for approaching businesses directly?
Sorry, Sarah, I don't know if it was my line or yours. I struggled to hear that. Were you saying how do we look to approach business?
Yeah, do you have a strategy in place now for direct approach? You know, how, because I ask that question because there will be lots of organisations, I imagine, some pretty unscrupulous ones, I would guess, that are going to start trying to sell testing kits and goodness knows what else. You know, how do you take your strategy forward? I think is what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. I think for me, I go back to this thing about not trying to reinvent wheels. So, for example, we had a conversation with a Cumbrian business yesterday that operates in a particular sector all over the world. They're in some ways they're very significant market leaders in their segment in the UK, and they operate all over the world. And they're a really dynamic business. So you know, they approached us and said, look, you know, we'd quite like to work with you and do a sort of a version for our sector. How do you feel about that? My instinctive reaction was, I think that's a great idea, because ultimately I think if we focus on that basic premise of test, control, learn, and then we work with the market to refine on that basis. So our focus is making the technology, the science, and the data become a learning journey. Then we work with business to develop that. I think that's us doing our job. I generally am a big fan of B2B in everything that I do, because I think, why go and put another B2C vehicle in the market when there's great people doing it anyway? If you become part of that chain and an integral part of that chain, and if you are part of that knowledge vehicle, then you're adding value. And so that allows us, as we scale up, to come back to likes of universities and say, right, we need some clever people to do work with this data, because we actually believe that as we go through this journey, we need to learn and create some algorithms that build us predictability on how a virus is going to behave. So let's take a university campus where you've got students from all over the world coming in. Yep. And you've got, and there's an outbreak. You've got to work out, well, you can't just shut a campus down again. It's just not conceivable. So you've got to work out, okay, well, how do we do that? We've actually got to put in test and control protocols that mean that campus can function. These students are probably going to get this, and they need to get it, and then they'll be fine. But there may be strains of this that are higher risk, and we believe there are strains that are higher risk. So the idea to test and identify strains, okay, right, that's a high risk strain, right, we need to actually zone that off or whatever. But that's the learning, that's the data, that's what algorithms allows it to do. So I think our route to market at the moment, we've got 3 conversations going. One with a particular sector, and I can't say any more at the moment, but if we do this, I'm extremely excited. It will make Cumbria very proud for so many layers, because this is a great business led by a great person. Probably worked out who it might be, but never mind. We're also working with a Manchester-based virtual PA service, because what I want to learn about is we have no administrative capacity. We're tiny. Yeah. And they have a portfolio of businesses they look after as virtual PA. They do call management, and they do concierge service for business. So we're actually in discovery with them, saying, well, hold on, could you go to the market as basically they could reach out to their market force today and say, look, here's a bolt-on service or a PA service to get you back to business, because it's about systems. We've designed a protocol and a Q&A, and actually we've done a check sheet that allows you to go through a decision-making matrix. So for example, if you've got a member of staff and you're asking them to commute in public transport, the idea is, before you leave home, you need to temp check and upload that onto a database through an app or whatever. Then when you get into work, before you get into the building, you'll be required to temp check and sanitize your hands. If you fail that at any point in time, you'll be asked to go back home and provide a sample that will be then sent to a lab. Okay, that sounds like really draconian at the moment, but if you think about it, what that means is when people are then in the building, there's going to be people in business for the next months and years are going to get really freaked when somebody's sitting coughing across the table from them, sneezing. They're going to panic and understand, because we're going to have versions of PTSD here. So lots of businesses won't even get near thinking about that yet. So we believe we've got to take our learning, because we've been living this, but not try and bombard people, not try and oversell it either, but let people evolve the learning and understanding. And if you do that through people who are working, if they do that through people they're working with, we believe that that's the way to do it. So, and then the third channel is actually, it's a security business, bizarrely enough, who approached us and said, hey, this is something that we think, would be helpful. So again, we said, okay, well, so we're sort of working to do something to help my sector. Can you help us? And we came back to that test, control, learn protocol.
Mm-hmm. How did these businesses find out that you were working on this testing model, though?
We've been using Colin Gilchrist, that's built the web platform, has been doing some really good stuff in social media. And so we've been putting some stuff out in social media. And I think because, a bit like you said, everything we do, so the 2 scientists, Chris Stanley and Stuart Wilson, and now Linda Anderson, that's joining the team as well, everything we do is led by the scientists. Mm-hmm. Everything that goes out is signed off by a scientist, and that's my rule. I say, as my job is to facilitate and strategize and put a pathway, but every single thing signed off by Chris as the lead scientist. Yeah,
it's got to be reliable, hasn't it? And that evidence base has got to be absolutely robust. It's got to work. Yeah.
Well, and it was, there's a very significant organization who asked us to come up initially with the whole idea of a protocol to get workers back onto site, because they have staff that they have projects they can't stop working on. They have to. They're defense projects and various things. So it's when they sent some questions, and Chris said, I need another day on this. I said, that's fine, have another day. And then he came back, and that's when he came up with the idea that, you will have to use temperature checking as a baseline. So temperature check at home, if that's okay, get on public transport. If it isn't, test or check again at lunchtime. So temp check, test. If you're okay, you can move. If you're not, you can't. And then that leads to, you know, when you get to your place, oh, sorry, that shouldn't have happened. Switch my phone off.
I'll be Boris,
Hello?
mate.
Sorry. Joys of phones. Am I
I think
still on,
Boris,
Keith? I don't know if it's
I think
going off or
Boris
not.
is watching this, so it's bound to be Boris.
Me, Boris.
Sorry about
Sorry,
that.
Stuart, go on, finish off, mate.
Yeah, so just switching this blooming thing off if I knew how to. If only knew somebody that knew how to help me switch an iPhone off. Oh, shut up. There we are. Right. Yeah. So where was I? Lost my train of thought entirely there. Oh yeah. So by having that idea of a protocol, test control protocol, it just allows us to, as I say, people to you can then make decisions based on evidence and fact, and not based on supposition and guesswork.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stuart. Great work. Brilliant.
It's good fun. It's certainly been a journey so far. Wow, it's been a journey so far.
Yeah.
Bob, I can't believe you haven't got a question.
It's not necessarily a question per se for what Stuart's doing, but I listened with great interest to what he was saying, and as he was going through, I sort of picked up on a couple of three things which, you know me, Keith. I don't know as the others do, but with my role and my considerations and my concerns for the SME world in general, I think some of your experiences and some of your comments sort of struck a chord with me, and I'm not quite sure how to frame the question, and I don't think it's a question for you specifically, Stuart, but interestingly, you mentioned that as you've been going through this process, you held up a little swab, and you said, well, we're getting into China, and until we can get to the point where we recognise the value of buying locally, and one of the things I've been wrestling with is the problem at the moment is social impact's moving in the right way and social value's moving in the right way, but it's not there yet. And one of the problems for me is the true cost of that swab from China is not just what it's cost for the swab, but it's transport, it's the environmental disaster and what its impact that it's done to the planet in shipping it across the world in a tanker, which are by far and away the worst and most inefficient ways of transporting stuff. God knows how many bloody tons of CO2 per mile they generate. But until our government has found, or the world in fact has found a way of saying that this is the true cost of any item, we can't really have a level playing field where you can say, well, this is only traveling 20 miles. And there's all sorts of other reasons, because we're getting the trees are sourced locally, da-da-da-da-da-da. This is a cheaper product, even though it's one. Because the problem is that private companies aren't picking up the bill for cleaning the planet. We are as taxpayers, and that's going unnoticed when it comes to the true cost of stuff. And until we get that message out there about what the true cost is, that's a blocker. Yeah, that's an observation, and I'm not quite sure.
It is, but I think one thing that strikes me, Bob, is with this is if you look at so for a long time now, what we've been doing is buying in cheap plastic consumables from China, and then sending them back our plastic waste up till about 18 months ago. So we've been operating a circular economy with China that's totally and utterly unsustainable. They don't want our plastic waste anymore because obviously the obvious reason. Well, actually, we've got to do something with that plastic waste. And if we generate energy from that, we can then produce the heat that we require to make these. So we can actually repurpose our waste into things like this by using it, by generating the energy first. Because if we turn our plastic into energy, we can produce electricity, not very efficiently, but we can produce electricity from it. We produce a lot of surplus heat. And it's the heat you can use to turn this sort of thing around with basically steam-based molding. So I actually think this is where innovation's key. And this is why I think the whole taking the Northwest as a cluster and using the Northwest, because the Northwest presents a fantastic opportunity, because we've got from as I use my simple language, the Roman walls in Chester to Hadrian's Wall, we've got this Roman block, as I describe in my head, which is, apart from a few chimney pots, has got a heck of a lot of open land and trees. And there's going to be, in terms of the whole kind of world of carbon offsetting, potentially a lot of inward investment coming in here over the next decade or two, as people seek to make themselves carbon neutral by 2050 by offsetting. And if we can purpose some of that inward investment money into manufacturing, not just this, but and using our waste, then we create a pretty unique, not unique, but a pretty vibrant proposition as a rural economy. And it fits with an energy coast. It fits with manufacturing clusters. It fits with the rural economy. So I completely agree. I think we've got to understand the value proposition that we've been living with to buy these things in and flip it. But unfortunately, I think it's the business will have to drive it. I don't think the government will ever get there.
But this is perhaps a point of discussion because until we need to engage with politicians, certainly local ones, that this needs to be part of the thinking. What I'm thinking here is that private industry, private business, for the most part, is going to do what's best for its shareholders. If it happens to be good for the environment, c'est la vie. Yeah, but it's not necessarily driven. I appreciate there are always exceptions to that rule, but generally speaking, large corporations are going to do what's right for its shareholders. Yes, we have an enormous amount of investment that's done by UK PLC. Me and Keith, we live less than 20 miles from somewhere that's spending on average about £2 billion per year, public money in their purse. So where I'm going with this is that what we really need to do is, from a politician's point of view, is we really need to drive this message that the cost is not about the unit cost; it is about the whole cost.
Yep.
And then, as government, are very much in the arena where they can make those determinations, and in fact, in their purchasing, make procedures which allow and take that into account when issuing contracts. I'm not being very. Perhaps I was coming across as being negative. I totally and utterly agree with you. What frustrates me is I think that we have to have some backup from people at Cabinet Office and within civil service to make these things happen. Because the next observation, SMEs, absolutely incredibly flexible. The way they've responded, within hours, within 72 hours of the call going out, they got bombarded with companies saying, we can do X, Y, and Z. It's all gone very quiet because when you look at the take-up of those companies as to how they've actually got then into the supply chain, what's coming out loud and clear is we've got this great product. In actual fact, we're selling it to everywhere else in the world, but our own country is staying with us. Now, I find that, considering that we're best part of 8 to 10 years into a policy by originally the Conservative and Liberal coalition, which was we want to sell so we want to buy 33% of our stuff from SMEs. I find that mind-boggling that we're still now this far on. And it's not government, it's not Boris, and it's not the politicians. It's the civil servants that have created this monster where they cannot. You've mentioned it yourself. The bureaucracy. They cannot deal with an SME, and until we find a way of tackling that, I mean, business can do. You absolute champion, and what you're doing is great. As a whole, across a very large spectrum of SMEs, until we get a change in this sort of policy of how we can deal with SMEs, we're always going to be behind the curve and struggling to build up a vibrant SME economy. I am absolutely 100%, 10% behind you, in as much as, in order to have a very vibrant economy, we need to have, it's a pyramid. We need masses and masses of SMEs being started, failing, growing, merging, doing whatever, and we don't have that at the bottom end. And I find, and again, it's opinions I'm picking up from your obvious experience that you've had with Cabinet Office and others, that I'm still not getting the message that this is the new normal for us. Do they recognise it's a new normal, and are they changing? Is there this is a massive juggernaut, and I don't see the seeds yet that there's actually thoughts that they're changing their policy in purchasing stuff. And I suppose that's so. Finally, I think direct question to you is, I don't see it, but from your visits that you've had, the three bodies that you've, do you see it? Do you pick it up? Is there any change in attitude towards the way these civil service departments are thinking?
No, is a quick answer. And the best evidence of that is what came out 2 days ago, that basically if there's, as I understand it correctly, forgive me if I've got this wrong, but my understanding is if there is a member of NHS staff dies of COVID, that will not be investigated externally, it'll be investigated internally. And without being, I'm not trying to be cynical, but if that is the case, that is completely contrary to an open, transparent society and an open, transparent economy. And that spells to me a bureaucratic monster that has probably acknowledged it's not done as good as it should, and is dreading the consequences and trying to lock it down as fast as possible, and not openly learn that we've made mistakes and change the way it behaves. And I think it's interesting because we desperately need not necessarily a government of unity, but we need the government and the opposition to act in unity, to go to this bureaucratic beast and say, right, over the next 10 years, we are going to change you, because we've had, an absolutely, we've had a medical failure, we've had a social failure, and an economic failure as a result of this. And we can never, ever have that again. And so big behemoth, centrally run organizations are not equipped to deal with that. That's what we've learned. So I think hopefully I would see that we'll see a government and a political agreement to deal with that, because the fiscal side of this hasn't even begun to hit yet, and that's going to be the absolute bomb. And I think that's the one that hopefully will teach us some lessons that, economically, this context that we're going to have a bounce back in Q3. What? We've run our economy into the ground. We've taken any reserves business had and stripped them of it, and then say, off you go and get back to work. So get back to work where there's no market confidence, there's no liquidity. Banks are probably going to be a negative interest rate, so they're not going to be in a hurry to do a great deal for a while. Everybody's going to be mentally beasted. Staff are going to take probably, I don't know, between 6 months and God knows how many years to get their head around what's just happened to them and get used to get back to work. It's going to be challenging. And so I just don't see this Q3 bounce back. I really don't. I think it's a much, much longer term picture.
No, I agree. The SMEs are always sort of first into the recession when it comes to these sort of things, and on the flip side, coming out, I only know from what it's like around here where PPP was put in place by Sellafield. Yeah, that whole process of organising that massive contract, this 20-year contract, it basically closed business. People stopped doing business with the supply chain. I don't even think that, even though the contract was awarded last year, back end of last year, I don't think the recovery as far as some SMEs in this area has started to take place before the lockdown. And that's just, a contract with a company. It's on a national level, it's going to be devastating for SMEs. So any SME that's thinking that, well, as long as X, Y, and Z, Fred Bloggins goes back into business, I'm going to be okay the week after. No, they're not, because quite rightly, that company's going to have to look after itself first, get itself back on an even keel before it can then start to engage again with its supply chain. We could be talking 12 months. Easy.
Tim?
I would put that down, Bob, to 18 months. I think it's going to take at least 18 months.
Right.
For the supply for anything to change. But Stuart, it was fascinating, my friend, and obviously we've had several conversations before as well. So I think there has to be a revolution. There has to be a revolution, that we have to change what we're doing. And it needs people like Stuart and us, we're talking, to actually create that. We have the greatest opportunity because we have a government with a big majority, and also he's got to look after the North, right? So I see this is our chance. If we don't do it now, we'll never do it, right? Labour, fine, you've got to start, the new leader there. Well, let's see how that will manifest itself out and everything else. But you're right, they need to come together. The civil service, like you, there is tons of money out there, right? Innovate UK, millions and millions of pounds of funding. Go and try and get it. Go and try and win it, right? Bureaucratic, absolute nonsense, right? So you're right. The starting point is we have to lobby the government. And I do believe that there is within the government to change the civil servant, to change what's going on there. And it's down to us being able to give them the information and everything else, and to empower that as well. They have enough evidence anyway, but to say this is actually blocking us from recovery. I've got examples of customers which obviously are in their supply chain, they're manufacturers, and although we deal mainly we're in the hospitality stroke sort of leisure health side of things, which are completely locked down. I mean, they're not, one of the big franchise groups we work with basically spoke with their CEO 2 days ago. He's saying, well, we probably will reopen in September, is when they're looking, right? Well, they've got 147 franchisees, right? They're going, well, what do we do? All right, so there's this. That's why I say it's going to be 18 months really before we even start to come out. Where I'm at the moment, and I've shared some stuff, but I'm looking and saying, right, okay, what do we have to do over this next 18 months to prepare the businesses to prepare businesses? And that's obviously your own micro communities with your customers, looking at sectors, breaking down those sectors, because I do see this as a massive opportunity. That, of course, when you're trying to get market share in a boom, it costs a hell of a lot of money, to achieve that. In actual fact, a lot of people don't even get there. In a recession, and people saying this is a V shape. I think this is an L. This is gone like this, and this is going to go like this, right? For a period of time. In my view, 18 months. I might be wrong, but I believe that. So you say, right, okay, what have we got to do, right, to stimulate and look at the different industries, break that down. Okay, how can we operate? How can we be better? And I do believe that if we put an argument together and go to the politicians and to the government and to where the funding is and say, listen, you want to get this moving, you've got to put this money into this in order to make this happen quicker and to get people back. So Stuart, going back to what you're doing there, which is the whole point about getting people back to work safely. Everything you're putting in place is about trying to get recovery is absolutely phenomenal. And that needs real push, that needs real support, that needs lobbying and everything else through. Because again, we have a manufacturer. He could literally have put masks, he could have manufactured the masks, he could manufacture beds, he can do all these things, right? He went to the NHS saying, listen, I can do this for you, right? He's still waiting. He's still waiting, right? So this is just absolutely, that's the craziness of our system. And not to rant and rave for too long, my other thing is I do believe that basically we have to go back to manufacture. I know the world is about looking after the world, right? And obviously we've got where people have been making clothes and everything else in Bangladesh or wherever it might be. We've got supply chains from China. I do think, I know that Brexit is in this argument. We have to look after ourselves first and get our own economy and our own balance, and then look after the rest, right? And now, of course, if we've got contracts, we support those contracts and everything else. But we've got to come inward, which obviously goes against the grain, right? Because a lot of things are about, oh, well, we've got to look after the world. We've got to look at it, because if this all goes to, goes to nonsense in these other parts of the world, that's going to create problems for us. I get all that, but there's got to be a balance. We've got to start manufacturing back in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely agree that manufacturing is the key. It feeds all these other. It feeds innovation, R&D, feeds absolutely everything. You've only got to look at the strong economies around the world. It's all based on with a manufacturing background. I was interested to look at something about Japan. I mean, we're always going about, oh, well, not so much these days, but in the day, Japan was the model. Toyota, Honda, Six Sigma, all that sort of stuff. What really interested me when you look at the model about Japan and its industry, it's struggling now, and it's struggling for the main reason that none of its younger class wants to go into the myriad of, excuse me, the myriad tens of hundreds of thousands of backstreet engineering companies that made up the supply chain for Toyota. Their supply chains, okay, the Japanese always bought the right piece of kit, wherever it was in the world. I get that. 90% of what they actually put into a car didn't come much more than 10 miles away from the factory. And it didn't come from one supplier, it came from hundreds of thousands. What they were really good at was picking up on Stuart's point, what they were really good at was putting out procedure so that every single one of their suppliers supplied to the same standard without equivocation, without the need for checking.
Yep.
So this notion of manufacturing being a dead dinosaur and we can all live by finance,
No chance.
just follow Japan. They're nosediving now because they can't get people to come into the industry. Everybody wants to wear the suit and live in a.
Yeah, I think that leads me back to 1st of March, sitting in London with the MIT program. So this, MIT all about transformation, refocus, reposition, new ecosystem, smart, all that stuff, and how you get stimulus. And it really struck me. And I was sitting at about 11 o'clock at night. So you always know things are going well when you've still got a few of you still with a glass of wine, rabbiting on it that time of night. I've been started at 5 in the morning, and the conversation went along the lines of, I'm so passionate about this. I'm like, we've got a very densely populated island. Okay, we've got a history of global trade. We've got a history of manufacturing. We've got a history of service. What we've got is a densely populated island. We create a lot of crap, right? And we've shipped that around the world and said, not our problem. We can't do it anymore. Nobody wants it. That crap is our new fuel. And if you look at America was built on cheap oil, okay? So when you make cheap, clean energy, you've then got a competitive edge in global manufacturing because you've got an edge on low cost and you've got an edge in provenance. And one thing that I find really fascinating in this journey is the global middle class are educated, and they'll have looked at the global middle class all over the world. And I define middle class by those that have got enough money to have a bit of choice and are access to global information to make that choice. So not necessarily by price bracket, by choice and spend. So they'll have been looking at this crisis and going, my children's future is now being compromised by the way we've mismanaged this virus. What am I going to do? I'm going to selectively buy and trade and deal with the people that are going to mitigate the risk of that in the way we run this planet. Because they will. Because the middle class are typically, as a society, will take a view on the future of their children and their children's children, because they take a longer view, because they've got the luxury of being able to do that. And as a country, that should be our target audience. We should be appealing to that market because we've got the ability to make, we've got the ability to service, we've got the ability to upsell, we've got the ability to trade, and we produce a lot of crap because there's loads of us on this island. We're so densely populated. So I do believe we've got a very unique value proposition. We've also got, because the northern half of the country is a massive landmass, we've got this internal carbon sink. We've got an oil economy that when it comes out of this is going to go, holy moly, we cannot go through this again. Shell's just missed its first ever dividend, I understand. First ever. And that's the pension economy we're going into free fall now. The pensioners are going, what on earth happened to that? We've been reliant on that payment to support our pension model. So the pensioners will be going, okay, where are we going to invest to get a smart return? And I think if we get that ecosystem principle right, which is we use our ability to trade, our ability to make, and the fact we've got a pile of crap that we can turn into fuel, and we've got all the energy of the fact we're a coastal, an island as well. By just taking that pragmatic view, we can, the Northwest Arc, as they call it, we can do it within that probably as well as anywhere, apart from Scotland, and arguably you could bolt the two together. We can do that as well as anywhere in the world. And I just think if we take that view, we can create high provenance, high quality, and not necessarily expensively made, and manufacturing economy, which is a lot more fun than being reliant on a city economy or a service economy. And a service economy is only as good as the economy. A manufacturing economy that makes things that people need every single day has resilience.
Yeah, totally agree, man. I mean, the thing is, that's what China's been built on.
Yeah.
And that's why when they started, that's pretty much why the world started to crumble around China, because they supply everybody.
Yep.
It's pretty much everything. So I think if this has taught us anything, it's that we need to rely on ourselves without a doubt. You know, I know I'm preaching to the converted, but it is nice, you know, to trade with other countries and things like that, but we have to be in a trading position, and at the moment we're not. we're a mile away. This has proved it. We're a mile away from it.
Well, if we don't do something different now, okay, so America's screwed, right? You know, their balance of trade and their debt levels as a result of this is going to be a mess, okay? And we're the same, all right? So the traditional Western powerhouses' balance sheets have taken an absolute kicking here. And I suspect, we all agree, they will do for a number of years to come. China hasn't. China's got that resilience, it's got the balance sheet, it's got the cash, it can do what it wants. So unless we change, we will become even more reliant. So I agree. I think, you know, Tim, your point's right. We've got 4 years while we still got this government to drive a change through that means we are not reliant on China. And others will be doing the same. And over the next 5 to 10 years, China's going to find itself sitting there needing to go and find customers. It will have the cash to invest, but we can't use it. We have to think about different ways of raising money. We have to get different ways of funding things. So that's why we've got to look at our pension fund model. We've got to think we can't rely on Chinese investment, and we can't rely on Chinese. We've got to flip the power model and localize it.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree, mate. I agree. I think that brings us nicely to a close. We've done just an hour, would you believe? And it's flown by. I think we could have talked for another hour, without a doubt. But no, thank you very much. Thanks to you, Stuart. That was an interesting talk that sparked some fantastic debate, which has been absolutely brilliant. So thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure speaking. Sorry,
thank you for the opportunity.
Are they going to be every Friday, Keith?
Just whenever, mate. Well, it's really when I get a chance. That's basically it. I just pester people till they say yes, and then I pick a slot in my diary.
Right. Okay. Good stuff. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Right.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes. Have a good day, guys. Take care.
Cheers.